to the latest edition of In Focus. I am your host, Andrea Carvajal. Although we're in the midst of a global pandemic, this hasn't stopped people from finding love. Today, we are sitting down with CSUF professor Patrick Ryan to discuss dating and relationships in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hello, Professor Ryan. Could you please introduce yourself briefly? What's your relationship to CSUF and the courses you teach?
Hi there, thanks for having me. I'm a lecturer in philosophy, and my kind of research specialization focuses on a bunch of different topics that are all clustered around questions about what reason is and why should we trust it. And right now my big project at CSUF, I call it Dissensus, is a public engagement research project where I work with students and we try to understand why some disagreements are so messy and prolonged and hard to get a grip on, and what we can do to make them more productive. You know, I discuss some of those topics in classes that I teach all the time, critical thinking. I also teach a history of philosophy class called Rationalism and Empiricism a lot. And I'm here today because I regularly teach pretty much every semester, at least historically, a really cool class our philosophy department offers called Philosophy of Sex and Love.
Since you're part of Sex and Love, what have you noticed in terms of how relationships look in the world right now, both personally and in the collective? I know personally, in my perspective during the pandemic, I've kind of been going back to relationships I already know, but do you think people are maybe going into new relationships? There's more pregnancies, maybe less? What have you seen?
One thing that's of interest to me as a philosopher is how the pandemic has changed the choices that we have to make. And also, as you were mentioning, kind of has changed where we're seeking love and relationships and connection and how we're doing it. It's hard to sort of say in general how relationships look because they're really varied, you know, based upon who the person is, where in the world you're at, and that sort of thing. But I think, you know, I'll pick out a few little trends, I guess, that I think illustrate the fact that the pandemic is sort of forcing people to make new choices about their relationships. Consider new relationships, first of all. You know, maybe you're kind of dating or looking for someone. Maybe you've just met someone. Well, March hits and all of a sudden we're being told, well, you've got to quarantine and not see anyone for 8 weeks. Now, that raises a really difficult set of questions. No one has captured it better, perhaps, than 21 Pilots. Will you be my quarantine or will this be the end, right? I mean, a lot of new couples are faced with that. Right? Do I really want to only see this person, right? Am I going to take the risk? Or is, you know, I've kind of got to make a choice right now. You know, that's one really interesting piece of it is new relationships are immediately faced with this conundrum, right? Do I want to quarantine with this person, right? Or are they going to be one of the very few people that I allow myself to see? A lot of people that I talk to kind of saw it as a dilemma, right? Do I want to continue dating this person and expose myself to all of the people that they're exposed to, and then maybe put my older parents or family at risk? And so, you know, it kind of pits family and the risks to family against relationships in some circumstances, and a lot of people found themselves having to make that really difficult choice. The other thing that I think has changed in a really interesting way is that a lot of single people who are trying to meet someone new and want to set up a date are finding it really hard just to find a place to do it, right? I mean, you're kind of, where do you go? You can't go out in public. Then, you know, a lot of the traditional dating places like restaurants or movies, or even just like going and meeting up at a park, you know, are not as available as they used to be. And so, you know, what dates look like is changing a lot. In connection with that point, one way that people met romantic partners, at least historically, was through mutual friends. And so, you know, you'd kind of have those when you're meeting someone new, you'd have the cushion of other people around, and, you know, a kind of mutual social conversation in which everybody can take part to form those initial connections, and those opportunities aren't available anymore. So, you know, in that respect, dating has gotten more intense, right? A date's going to mean sitting down one-to-one and just having the two of you to rely on to keep the conversation going. One last thing that I'll mention with respect to new relationships is the mask divide. Unfortunately, you know, which precautions ought to be taken has become heavily politicized, and a major source of disagreement, as you all know. And relationships are not immune to that. Oftentimes people like to keep it light when they're first dating and not get into their political views and that sort of thing. But the pandemic really forces people right away to have that kind of awkward conversation. Do you want me to wear a mask when I come in? Or what's your distancing looking like, and so on and so forth.
I also kind of think that maybe that helps a relationship, right? Like, straight on what you're getting into and what the person is like, maybe political views, if you're going to wear a mask, maybe not. So maybe this is kind of helping new relationships in a way.
Absolutely. It really depends on what you're looking for. If you're kind of just looking to keep it casual, then, maybe you don't want to, kind of dive right in and have this negotiation, right, about how you're going to kind of coordinate your values with one another. But if you're looking for something more lasting and you're like, hey, I want to cut through the crap and really get to know this person, then, maybe having to kind of openly communicate about a potentially sensitive topic can really be a great way to form a bond with a person.
And are you seeing any trends right now in maybe pregnancy rates, weddings, divorces, breakups?
There are a few trends. I think one big debate right now, if you type in divorce rates during coronavirus and search for it, you'll see some people, saying it's the end of the world, everyone's getting divorced. And then you'll see other headlines saying, divorce rate at an all-time low. So what's going on? Well, I think there was some anticipation that with people kind of being together all the time now, especially when they have children, at least the kids used to be out at school. Now you're at home with your kids and your spouse and you're trying to work, and, the boundaries between personal life, the kids' life, and work have totally kind of gone away. A lot of people are predicting that that's going to lead to like tons of marital friction. Actually, though, it looks like the opposite has been the case, at least according to Brad Wilcox at UVA. Divorce is actually going down right now as a result of the pandemic. And his conclusion about that was part of the reason divorce is going down is because people are learning how much they need their partners, right? The kind of trials of the pandemic have taught people like, wow, this person is really an amazing source of security and support. And maybe I didn't appreciate all the things that they were doing for me before. In terms of pregnancies, I'm not so sure that coronavirus is necessarily reducing the rate of pregnancy so much as another driving factor. One thing that we know from the past is that economic recessions tend to lead to a big dip in the number of births. Basically, the birth rate is tied to how well an area is doing. And you can see this locally when a kind of local economy is doing well, its birth rate ticks up. And you can see it nationally. During the 2008 recession, we saw, the birth rate drop off by, 500,000 births. And given that, we're facing similar sorts of economic woes right now, the kind of prediction is that we'll see a similar big drop off in birth rates. One other kind of unfortunate thing that we're seeing is because of limitations on medical care, we're seeing the number of stillbirths and miscarriages rise because people just aren't able to get in for the same number or frequency of appointments given all of the restrictions regarding movement and the safety precautions that hospitals have to take, especially when they get overwhelmed by COVID patients.
Like how you mentioned that, and these are things that I didn't even think about either. And part of the marital problems, going back to there, have you seen maybe any potential surges in couples counseling? Do you think people are taking that as well?
Couples counseling is another kind of interesting trend, like the divorce rate. It's frankly, we don't really know what's going on, and we won't for a while. And to figure out, what's causing what, I'd really have to, ask my sociologist colleagues, once all the data comes in and they have an opportunity to analyze it. One thing that we are seeing, for example, with respect to counseling, I'll just give one little anecdotal example. The Military Times was recently reporting that more people in the military were seeking couples counseling. There was more demand for it. But they also concluded that it wasn't the result of coronavirus. This is a really interesting case where we might see the rates of couples counseling appointments go up during coronavirus, but coronavirus might not be what's explaining that increase in seeking counseling. One big driver behind it, and probably what the Military Times was running with when they were concluding that it wasn't coronavirus, is that people's attitudes towards couples counseling are changing. It used to be the case that, if you're like, oh, I'm in couples counseling, the insinuation there, what people would read from that was, oh, things must not be going well. This must be, the last ditch effort to save the relationship. And that's just not really how people are using couples counseling exclusively anymore. A lot of new couples are seeking couples counseling. And, just as an opportunity to make sure that they take that time out, sit down, have conversations about important topics like finances, like, family, those sorts of things. And so basically you might think, well, yeah, there's this huge upsurge during coronavirus. It looks like lots more, everyone's struggling, everyone needs counseling. But it might just as well be the case that it's people's changing attitudes about couples counseling that are explaining the increased rate. So like I said, what's driving what's causing what the trend is, we don't know yet.
Right. Well, next year we'll see what this data looks like. Now let's get into dating apps.
Sure.
Obviously, college students have been on this since the beginning of the pandemic. Do you think it's heightened, and do we see trends where people have just been turning to that rather than meeting up? And do you think it's maybe more safe or maybe more harmful?
Well, so the subscription rates to dating apps are definitely on the rise. Big bump. It's kind of funny because, again, a lot of people are saying, oh, this is going to be the end of dating apps, right? No one's going to want to be on them if they can't go meet up with the people that they find. Interestingly, that's not been the case. So subscriptions to dating apps are on the rise, but there's a couple little wrinkles there that are worth mentioning. One of them is that there's actually a lot more platforms popping up now, kind of smaller ones that serve more focused audiences. And they're actually taking a significant number of subscribers away from the really big apps, historically have dominated the dating app scene. The other interesting piece of this is the way people are using dating apps is changing. People are not using dating apps, for the sake of like finding someone to go on a date with. And so like that use, and if that has declined, and if that's what a service primarily offers, those sorts of uses are definitely on the decline. But we've seen a big uptick in people using dating apps for the chat function. So people kind of looking for just opportunities to talk to people who they might be interested in. And then there's also a big uptick in using dating apps to schedule virtual dates. And those are, a lot of the apps now have that kind of built into it. But of course, there's also the opportunity to use Zoom or set up dates in that way.
Yeah, I know personally a lot of my guy friends have told me lately, like, they don't even want to go on dating apps because they're like, well, we usually go meet people at like restaurants or bars or things like that, but we can't even go there. So they're like, might just not even meet someone until the end of next year. And I'm like, well, that's okay, right?
Yeah, it's kind of, I think this is one of the lessons that I've learned from the pandemic, at least, which is how you kind of regard these things really depends on your attitudes, beliefs, and values before the pandemic. People who really don't like dating, right? They find like going on the apps and, trying to figure out who they're actually going to like and who they have a connection with. For people who find that didn't like it in the first place, a lot of those people have the attitude that you were just discussing, right? Which is, well, all right, I guess I'm done until the pandemic is over. On the other hand, when a lot of people who would say of themselves, I really crave social interaction, they're gung-ho about the dating apps. They're like, yeah, this is great. I'm going to get on as many of them as I can so that I can have, at least sustain some opportunity to socialize with people. So this is one of the ways in which people's kind of existing attitudes about love, romance, and relationships get just inflected into new circumstances. So, it's really not a one verdict story, I guess. Whether or not the dating apps during the pandemics are great or stink really depends on what you're looking for in a relationship and how you want to use those apps.
And going off of social interactions, do you think the pandemic has permanently changed how we interact with others and how we form relationships?
Well, so time will tell if it's permanently changed things. The thing that is interesting to me from a philosophical point of view is, I sort of alluded to this a minute ago, but how, I don't think love has changed necessarily. However, love has been transposed into new circumstances. And so the way that love can kind of show up has changed. And I want to give just kind of one detailed example of what I mean by that. In philosophy, one of the big questions for the philosophy of sex and love is, what is love? And part of the way that question has been investigated by philosophers is by asking, in essence, what does love want? Right? There are a lot of ways that you can want a person, or a lot of things that you can want a person for. And the proposal's been, if you want to distinguish different types of attitudes that we can have towards people, well, then distinguish what those different attitudes want, right? What are they kind of drawing you towards? My own view on this is that there's not going to be a single answer to what it is that love in particular wants, as opposed to, for example, sexual desire or, the desire for social interaction. But love is going to, kind of probably be a big cluster of a whole bunch of different attitudes working together in a complex way. And certainly one of them is attachment. And you may be familiar with attachment historically when talking about children. Ainsworth and Bowlby discovered that you could predict a lot about a child's behavior based upon the character of their attachment to their caregiver. Well, we've recently found out that attachment styles show up in romantic relationships as well. Attachment is that kind of desire for security that you get from being emotionally responsive to another person and having them be emotionally responsive to you and your needs. And there are different ways of dealing with your desire for others to be emotionally responsive to your needs. And to bring out some of those styles, I have a quiz for you, Andrea. You can't host a professor without having them bring a quiz. So I want to take a minute just to read a couple statements. All our viewers can give their, consider what their response to each of these would be. So consider each of the following. When my partner is away, I'm afraid that he or she might become interested in someone else. I often worry that my partner will stop loving me. Statement 2. My partners often want me to be more intimate than I feel comfortable being. I find it difficult to depend on romantic partners. And statement 3. I have little difficulty expressing my needs and wants to my partner. Sometimes people see me as boring because I create little drama in relationships. So, there may be some partial disagreement, but the question, of course, is which of these do you think describes your own attitudes towards your relationship? Now, I won't put you on the spot and ask you to answer right now, but depending on how you answered, we get a bit of insight into our own attachment styles. The first statement, when my partner is away, I'm afraid that he or she might become interested in someone, is a characteristic of what's called anxious attachment. Anxiously attached people, they want the object of their attachment present, right? That's when, why aren't they answering my phone calls, or when are they going to get back to my text message? Right? Those are kind of the expressions of anxious attachment. The second set of statements, my partner wants me to be around more often than I want to. They want me to share my emotions more often. That's an expression of what's called avoidant attachment. And basically, avoidant attachment involves dealing with another person's demands that they be emotionally responsive by essentially seeking some distance. And finally, the last one, I don't have a hard time talking about my emotions, is an expression of what's called secure attachment. And secure attachment is characterized by being emotionally responsive to your partner, feeling that they're emotionally responsive to you, feeling comfortable talking about your emotions in a frank, non-threatening way, and so on and so forth.
So that's the one we aim for.
We're shooting for secure attachment, but of course, as I'm sure many of us are thinking as we're going through this, we're not quite there yet. And there is some good news. You do have some control over your attachment style, although it's very difficult to change. Most of the surveys, when you kind of determine someone's attachment style and then survey them again 7 years later, they've got the same attachment style. So they can be changed, but with some work. These attachment styles are what we're dealing with in our relationships all the time. Two of them don't go together very well. If you're anxiously attached and you're constantly yearning more attention, and you're dating someone who's avoidant, right, and their kind of response to attachment is to push them away, you're going to find yourself with conflicting attachment needs. Now, that can work for a lot of people, right? If you spend your day at work all day, you have some distance, you kind of come home, the partners can kind of might be a source of friction, but you can kind of manage it. Think about how that changes all of a sudden when you're quarantined together. Maybe you're both working from home, right? Now, all of a sudden, the avoidantly attached person can't get any distance from their partner, right? And they might think this whole quarantine thing is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I feel like I'm drowning and being smothered by my partner. On the other hand, quarantine might be a dream for someone who's anxiously attached, right? I'm constantly worried about my partner being away and whether they'll, like someone else when I'm not around. Well, if your partner's home all the time, all of a sudden, all the opportunities you could ever want for responsiveness from your partner are right there. Now, of course, that can exacerbate the kind of relationship frictions that come from anxious or avoidant attachment as well. So, this is just kind of one example of how these things have been going on in our relationships all the time. But as our circumstance changes, I think what we see when we're looking for changes in relationships is ways in which the kind of existing attitudes behind our relationships are just given new opportunities to show themselves or to create new problems.
I like that. Like, you can use whatever attachment there you have to your relationship and understand what you're feeling towards them. I'm not gonna lie, I felt maybe 2 of those out of 3 in past relationships, and you look back and you're like, wow, maybe I shouldn't have felt that way. But I like the theory that you brought up.
Yeah, it definitely helps us, explain a lot of the responses that we're having, right? If you're anxious about your partner, why aren't they answering my texts, right? It's helpful to kind of pause for a minute and think, all right, is this something about them? Are they kind of actually ignoring me and I should be angry with them? Or is this just an expression of my anxious attachment towards my partner? And, I need to kind of take a moment and figure out how to communicate my needs to my partner in a way that doesn't blame them for not being there at my beck and call.
And has the heightened use of video games, social media, and the increased viewing of, movies, streaming services maybe helped or harm relationships? I know personally, Animal Crossing Switch came out in the beginning of the pandemic. Now it's the PS5. People are just going crazy with these video games. So do you think it's maybe helpful or hurtful?
I think we see a few things. I'll just mention video games for one example. When we were discussing dating apps, whether or not people love or hate pandemic dating depends on what they're looking for, right? The people who are yearning for social interaction think the dating apps are great. People who just, want to find a person and figure out who they are and find someone to go steady with, and who really hate the kind of chatting, dating apps, not so great. Video games can be the same way for a lot of people, depending on what the video game is. It offers an opportunity to stay connected with friends and to continue to socialize. Especially for a lot of young people, video games have really been a way for them to maintain some of their social relationships with their peers. When it comes to romantic relationships, video games have historically been a big flashpoint, though. One big point of disagreement amongst couples is how much time their partner is going to spend either looking at their phones or playing video games. And a lot of disagreements and friction arise from disagreements about, how much should you be on your phone? How much should you be playing video games? So insofar as that was already something that bothered a partner, an upsurge in video game time, which we've seen, especially a lot of men massively increasing the amount of time they're spending playing video games, can be, really bad for a person's relationship, especially insofar as video game playing crowds out time that could be spent, face to face, thereby making one's partner feel ignored or, they prefer the video game to me. Again, there's no single answer to whether or not video games resorting to video and watching TV will help or harm relationships. It'll be a mixed bag based upon, again, a whole bunch of variables that can change the impact that these things have on people's lives.
And I'm not sure if you watch Grey's Anatomy, but I do. And their new season just came out, and it started with COVID. So what do you think about seeing COVID depicted in the media? Is it maybe a good historical marker in your opinion, or does it diminish the use of escapism media?
Yeah, really interesting question. I did watch Grey's Anatomy when it first came out, and some of my family members still watch it, and they were kind of, their response was, "Oh, this is terrible, right? COVID's all around me all the time. The last thing I want to do is watch it on TV." Personally, I don't know what my particular reaction to this stuff. Though the one thing I will say is I do think that the way it's portrayed is sort of funny. It's really funny to me when they are doing a good job and everyone's wearing masks and they're kind of, talking about COVID and its impacts and social distancing. One of my favorite scenes from the show Superstore, 2 of the characters want to hug, and so then they just, are hugging themselves, and one of them starts to let go and he says, "Nope, one more minute," so it's, I think those sorts of things can bring moments of humor, but the thing that's funny to me is people walk up and then when it's time to talk, they take their masks off, so I think you have a lot of bad behavior being portrayed on a lot of the shows, especially the more famous, the bigger the star, the less likely it is that they're going to be wearing a mask while they're, having a heated argument or something with someone. As a matter of, there was some interesting discussion on some of the culture and radio and television shows about whether or not we'll have COVID consultants in the future so that they can, when they're portraying 2020, they can make sure that it's historically accurate.
Nice. Well, I didn't even know that. So that's should be interesting to watch the future movies and things that they're going to put out. What final advice do you have for people, specifically young adults, college students, in their relationships during this time in a pandemic? And do you have any tips for fostering relationships, maybe platonic, romantic, during this time?
I think it's one thing I've learned is relationships look so different, right? And they're in large respects so individualized that it's hard to give generic advice that works for everyone. I wanted to mention the attachment theory stuff today because I do think it's the most practical and robust finding that we have in kind of recent history surrounding the nature of romance and adult relationships. And there is one bit of advice that theory predicts, which, as we said before, the goal is to get us to secure attachment, right? When two people are securely attached, it has massive consequences, both for the well-being of the relationship, but for their individual well-being as well. One of the things that's most astounding to me is people in securely attached relationships see pretty significant physiological changes. For example, if you are securely attached and your partner is kind of nearby and supportive, you can actually see a reduction in people's cholesterol when cholesterol is kind of just below the unhealthy level. On the flip side, people who are don't have healthy attachment relationships, you get the inverse result. Cholesterol can actually go up. The experience of pain can be mitigated by one's attachment style. And there is something that you can do to help you get towards a secure attachment. The first is to realize what your attachment style is. So the quiz questions that I was reading off before are from Levine and Heller. They have a book called Get Attached, which I think is excellent. And the little piece that I was reading is actually republished in a 2010 edition of Scientific American. So you can find it online and go read a little short version of it, take their little attachment quiz and start learning a little bit more about your own attachment style. And then start recognizing when those attachments, when your attachment style is showing up in your interactions with your partner. And frankly, the kind of single most important thing that you can do to kind of make sure that your relationships are healthy and satisfying for both of you is to be able to frankly communicate your needs to your partner in a non-threatening way. So, a lot of people get to the first part. Okay, I need to communicate my needs. I need to tell my partner, I need to see them for dinner 5 nights a week. But the non-threatening part can be a little bit difficult, right? If you say, you need to be home for dinner, then you're communicating your needs in a way that's placing blame on your partner. They feel like they're being attacked, and that's just going to make it more difficult to communicate with them. On the other hand, if you say, I really would like it if you could be home earlier. I miss you while you're gone, and I want to see you at the end of the day. You've now told your partner what your needs are without kind of expressing those needs in a way that make it seem like the partner is being derelict in their duty to pay attention to you. So that's it. If you can kind of practice just that and keep that in mind, that is the biggest contributor towards fostering a healthy attachment relationship and to practicing intimacy in a way that will help your relationship. I've been married for a long time. I find we're all amateurs in love. No matter how well you think you've got your relationship under hand, practicing that little piece of advice that comes from attachment theory is something that we all need to do regardless of where we're at in our relationship.
I mean, communication is and forever will be key, as they say.
That's true.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. I would like to thank our guest, Professor Patrick Ryan, for joining us today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andrea Carvajal, with In Focus. Stay safe, Titans.